Hi, everyone. So welcome, and I'm really excited for our panel talk today. So today I have with me three really strong leaders. I'll be your moderator for today. I'm Ling. I lead 500 Startups Innovation and Partnerships team in Southeast Asia, and I'm also the co-founder of an education startup, Smarter Me. And my three panelists today, Beverly, Chen, Marketing Director at AppsFlyer APAC, Karen, who you just heard from, at AirAsia, Karen is connecting people to people, creating communities of like-minded travelers. And then I have Surina, who is the CEO of MDEC. So Surina has 2 decades of experience in investment banking, strategy, and business management. And she's also an entrepreneur. She started Shinnovation Ventures, a venture studio focusing on crypto and blockchain. I really like what Surina said here, and she said her role is to show people what the art of the possible actually is. Now, before we get started on today's topic, I wanted to actually run a poll. So if all of you could actually go to the poll feature on who below, you should see a poll available there. And the questions that you should be able to see are, which of the statements have you heard being said? Not sure if everyone can see the poll here. Okay, but if you can, I would like you to actually go to the poll and actually answer the poll to see if any of the statements you've actually heard being said. Some of the statements here are prescriptive, some are descriptive, and women generally face both the descriptive and prescriptive biases. So this could be something that you've said. It could also be something that you've heard being said to you or to someone else as well. I also want to set the tone that today we are not on a witch hunt. It's not men versus women, but we do want to uncover and talk about some unconscious bias that is present. So first and foremost, I actually like to kick off with stories. It can be your own, ideally your own, because I think the audience here will all like to hear your personal stories, but it could also be a story of someone you know. So I would like you, all three of you actually, to share the biggest, hairiest, unconscious bias that you've seen women face at work. If we could start with Surina, and then we'll go on to Beverly and then Karen.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I'm excited to be here this morning. And so a little bit, my background, like I've always been in male-dominated areas. So finance, and not just finance, it was investment banking, and it's corporate, it's like US, Wall Street, and so forth. So I'm just gonna start with I'll just share a little bit of my experience and what it was like, and I'll draw on 3 different kinds of biases that women face throughout the course of their career. So in the early days, when I was an associate in banking, there was always this whole notion of, yeah, do we really want to promote her? Because I'm pretty sure she's going to leave after she gets pregnant, you know? And so there was this whole notion that women tap out, and then you can't balance motherhood and in your career. And I actually attest to that, because I remember at one point I was using motherhood as an excuse to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to quit banking. That's a legit excuse. But then what Cheryl, this was around the time that Ling came out, and then Sheryl Sandberg was reminding people that, you know, sometimes we quit before we even ahead of time. And so there's this biasness that women are not interested to carry on. And there is some systemic things, because the structure, there is that time when you are, that coincides with family raising and your career. So that's something that organizations just continue to need to like help work on. The other thing also, later on in my career, I'm sharing stories of another big bias, which is basically women don't know tech. And this is something that we would need to overcome, which is just far from the truth. So I left JP Morgan and then jumped in the world of blockchain and crypto. And there are lots of technologists that are women, and they're all badasses, and I get so much inspiration from them. And so there's this whole biasness that the technicals that we don't really, show forth that. And then finally, another bias is that, you're not really in charge. And so how can she be the CEO? No, I'm sure it's this other person, like she's probably the assistant. So there's still that. And so some of these things, what I would represent is that if you know that there's bias, there's ways we can actually attack it head on.
I love what you said at the end there. Just want to talk about tech as well. We have a lot of audience here today who are female founders. And I think a lot of them can also actually attest that when you go and meet a VC, oftentimes women are asked if they understand the technology behind things, but men never get asked that question. But what I really like about what you said, Surina, is really awareness, being aware of the biases, and then how can we tackle that? And we'll come to that a little bit later as well. Beverly, would love to hear your story.
Sure. I was just trying to think quickly. I have one of my own, and I have one that springs to mind of somebody that I met recently. But, the other day I was actually attending a founders and friends sort of a dinner hosted by a VC. So it was all people in that world and founders and things like that. And at one point, I don't think I noticed straight on, but at one point I sort of stood there, looked around the room and thought, my God, I'm actually the only woman here in this whole room. And it was one of those moments where, you see statistics and things like that, but I really felt like a walking statistic at that time. And another was, I had coffee with this wonderful woman last week, and you hear about, and this ties back to what Surina was saying, this proverbial maternal wall. When professional women have children, they often find themselves running into a wall where their commitment and their competence are questioned, and opportunities might start drying out, or as Surina was saying, they see it as kind of a tap out. So I think these are all things that many women face at some point in their careers. And I think not just in tech, but this idea of unconscious bias really applies to all industries, because these biases are cultivated from, if you think about it, before we're born. Right, classic, pink for girl, blue for boy, and so ingrained in how we as human beings are taught to think. So, that's something that I think is really interesting and ties into a lot of the challenges that we find ourselves facing as well.
Thanks, Beverly. What about Karen? What about you?
Thanks, Ling. And Beverly, I still like pink. I got two stories that I would like to share, and it's really about the great divide that both the earlier speakers were talking about. One is a personal story, between being a woman and then becoming a mother. I still remember, like when I just had my son. In Hong Kong, you can only have basically 10 weeks of maternity leave. I basically utilized all my maternity leave to postnatal. I was actually, I was doing a C-section, and I actually checked myself, and I was still on my phone before I actually had to undergo the surgery. And I still remember that most of my colleagues, because I was actually in fast food, and so a lot of the leadership team would be male, because sometimes we also need to work shift as well. And they were thinking, oh, Karen's going to come back, she's not going to be able to go and dedicate the same amount of time. She got a young baby. And I think women are actually masters of time management and opportunity. So what I would normally do is that when I actually have telephone conferences, I would actually be doing breast pumping. So there was one time when I was actually in the room with, quite a few of our other, US and other colleagues, and they say, what is that noise? And then I realized it was actually my electronic milk pump. So I guess, when people actually start, doubting you, woman actually has that sort of rebound to say, if you want to prove me wrong, I'm going to go and do 200 times harder to make sure that, but I guess this is actually a very unconscious bias. Women always try to do better and try harder. So that's one of the anecdotal story of myself. Another one, which I think is a very positive bias, that I'm so privileged to be able to work for AirAsia. As you can understand, AirAsia is still very much a founder-led organization. Tony and also Datu Din, it's all about inclusion and diversity. And I think I shared it earlier once, was that I was actually part of an interview, and Tony loves asking pointed questions. Whether you are a man, whether you're a woman, as a candidate, you will be served pretty pointed question, because Tony would like to go and break your guard to understand, how do you react? How do you respond to challenges? And so I still remember that time we are trying to go and find a head of a particular function. And he said, after all the, the right competencies, she has the right skill sets. And then you just throw out a question and say, so are you married? And the candidate just got a bit taken aback and said, I have a young child. So she was skirting the question a bit. And so Tony said, no, I asked you, are you married? And then the candidate said, the husband is actually overseas, so I look after the child. And Tony said, no, I'm asking you, are you married? And then the candidate said, look, I'm not married. I have a child. I can still fly and do whatever this job requires because I have a very good family support. And Tony just laughed and said, you are hired. We celebrate single parenthood because Tony strongly believes single moms or single fathers, they treasure every single opportunity because they are the only breadwinner and they will value the opportunity given to them. And sure enough, this particular candidate is now basically one of my best performer. She's the first to come in and the last to leave. So I think sometimes, bias can also be favorable bias as well.
Yeah, I think that being said, I love all the stories that you guys shared. One thing to keep in note as well is that, what are we normalizing, right? And is it right to then normalize this? Women actually do 75% of the unpaid care work globally. And, again, your story about being on the phone right up till you're giving birth. I remember when I was in banking, I had a male boss who said that he almost missed his wife's delivery, and everyone was like celebrating it. They were like, oh my God, so cool. You're so hardworking and everything. And it's that the culture we want to normalize, right? Okay, so thanks so much for sharing all your personal stories. I'd actually like to pose this question to Beverly next. Almost every business is confronting a crisis in 2020. So how have you seen women leaders step up during this crisis? What innate strengths do you think women have that should be leveraged on to step up as leaders and emerge stronger?
That's a great question. I think instead of talking about innate strengths, because I think it's difficult to generalize based on gender, I really want to talk about cultivated strengths, strengths that aren't a result of being born a certain way, but rather common strengths that you might see because women have the same expectations placed on them, the same challenges, the same sort of pressures, or because we go through similar experiences that shape these strengths. And I think that most importantly, these are strengths that any leader can learn to cultivate, male or female. But I think number one, clarity and conviction is incredibly important. You have to have fortitude and the ability to act. I think, as Karen said previously, courage is very important as a leader. Second, I think empathy, understanding that you as a leader can affect someone. And I'll give you an example. At AppsFlyer, from the beginning of COVID, our CMO made it a point of scheduling check-ins with every single person on the marketing team globally. He's still doing it today. We established really early on a work from wherever policy where, beyond work from home, helping people fly back to their home countries to be with family, stay as long as they need, offering that flexibility for both parents so that, for example, it's not only on the mom. Sending weekly care packages. So I think that understanding of you never really know what's happening in somebody's personal life and affording them that flexibility and that opportunity. And I think lastly, what I really want to talk about is I think, watching women respond to crisis or how they deal with setbacks and how they deal with failure is something that I've always really admired, whether it's external from your environment that you can't control or a result of your own action. It's this sense of dogged determination in the face of difficulty, right? Or when you take from your experience in motherhood of doing whatever you need to do. So it's always striving to do better and be better. And that's something that I think is really important to take as a leader.
Thanks so much, Beverly. And thanks for calling me out, because the funny thing about bias is that it goes both ways. So I don't know how many of the audience actually realized that my question earlier about innate strengths was already perpetuating a prescriptive bias. So thanks, Beverly, for calling that out. Karen, I know that you had strong, gender neutral views on how a leader needs to step up during a crisis. So when we spoke last time, you did talk about courage and clarity. Can you elaborate more about this, skills and strengths that both male and female leaders ought to do?
Thank you. Yeah, just to build on what Beverly was saying as well, I think in terms of crisis, and the airline is in the brunt of it, how do you actually lead with courage and also with character? I mean, it's it's no secret, right, that a lot of the aviation industry have to go and start furloughing staff and has to let go of staff because it is what it is. International borders are not opening, maybe until end of Q1. What are we going to do? And I think the natural empathy that women has when you need to go and have these tough conversations go a long way. I mean, I think there's a very famous saying, it's not about what you say, but it's about how you make that person feel when you say it. I mean, for the first 2 months, the first 8 weeks, apart from managing 60 more times on customer complaints because of all the refund and cancellation, we have to go and make very decisive decision. Do we cut? Do we repurpose? If we cut, how do we go and repurpose our staff? There were a lot of these tough conversations. And because women are natural nurturers, and I have to literally, like during those tough times, when we first went into lockdown, we're sleeping maybe about 3-4 hours a day. And when you have these conversations with the staff that has been very loyal to the airline, and that you need to go and say, I'm very sorry, but we do not have a job for you. The way you actually communicate the same message with the same outcome makes a hell lot of difference. And I think one thing that I'm very, very proud of for AirAsia is that before we even come to that decision, we continually to look at how can we repurpose. We have repurposed close to 4,000 staff. In my previous keynote, I was talking about we are now pivoting into last mile delivery. We need drivers, and drivers doesn't have to be necessarily men. It can be women as well. We have a lot of female cabin crew that basically put their head up and say, Karen, let me volunteer. And I still remember one particular story that really touched me was that we were also doing a lot of charity work, giving care packages to minus B40, below B40 communities, right? There's a lot of need within Malaysia. We go and start giving away care packages. There was one particular crew that I know that she would be leaving. And I said, hey, how come you're still here? She said, Karen, I want to thank you, AirAsia, for the past 12 years. Today is my last day. I still want to go and serve. So I think it's really about, in times of crisis like this, how do you go and galvanize the team? How do you go to tell the reality as it is, but be very human about it? Yeah. Because all of us have families, all of us have elder parents, right? How do we still give whatever we can, to a company that has given us so much back? So I think that is basically the narrative that I've continued to reinforce with my team.
Karen, I will add on to that because you used the word human, and I wrote down one of the things about having women in leadership positions. I find that it kind of gives permission for people to be more human. I almost feel because we have to be bold to appreciate the fact that you've got family, you've got kids, you've got all that, and even if you look at the corporate structure these days. Now, men also appreciate the fact that you can be at home and you have family responsibilities as well. So and then the empathy and the vulnerability that sometimes we showcase, it just gives projecting that, it almost gives permission for people. I think people generally were waiting for permission. Like, are they allowed to even show any weakness? God forbid. And that's the thing that I like about some of the, at least some of the inspirational leaders that I see, just showing that vulnerability and being more human, I think is what moves organizations and people. Inspires.
Fully agree with what you both actually said. And I think in the current climate, a lot of the tech leaders, the founders are facing that, especially. How do you let go of staff? How do you communicate that? And I do also agree that increasingly we're seeing a lot more leaders become more open about their vulnerabilities, the challenges that they're facing, and just, being more open to letting people see who they really are and what they're really facing. Yeah.
I wanted to just add to that it's so true. And to build on that, something I like to remind my team is also, you can have a lot of criticism, I think, especially in any kind of leadership position you're in, even if you're not, when you're going through a difficult time as a company or as a business, it's really easy to point the finger the other way, right? So I like to remind my team of this quote that goes something like, the credit does not go to the critic in the stand. It goes to the person on the field, bloodied and bruised, striving to achieve something. And I think that's really important to remember.
Thank you. And okay, so we're down to our last couple of minutes. I want to talk about something maybe a little bit controversial, right? So Surina, when we talk about unconscious gender bias and empowering women, there are, I believe, both systemic and also self-imposed challenges. So Google's I Am Remarkable initiative arose because of gender modesty norms where women are uncomfortable promoting themselves. What I'd like to hear is your take on this, right? In order to empower more women, is the challenge inside out or is it outside in?
I think it's a little bit of both, because there are systemic. We talked about the systemic biases that we had. I also think that particularly Asian women, we were brought up to say, oh no, humble, humility, and we never learn. If I were to ask each one of you, like right now, what is your superpower? What are you great at? Most people can't answer that because they've never taken the time to really think about like, why are you awesome? No, I don't know. Somebody will say I'm awesome, but we have to cultivate that sense of no. How do we project ourselves? How do we showcase our strengths, and how do we position ourselves so that we can project our awesomeness. I think typically we tend to do that last. And then also there is this notion that we don't ask enough either. Because also some of the things that women were taught growing up is that, talent should speak for itself. You do a good job, reward you. But that's not necessarily true. It's true, that gets you to the baseline, but you need to ask for what you want and then be very bold about it. I think generally speaking, this is something even myself, I'm still continuing to learn how to do this better. But I really do think that there is a little bit of untraining of some of the norms that we have to do ourselves as well.
Thanks so much, Surina. And Karen, at the same time, we spoke about this inside out and outside in before in our previous call. So we'd really like to hear your take on what needs to change, whether it's starting with ourselves or from the outside in.
I totally concur with Surina. It's definitely both. It's definitely inside out. Sometimes women are our own worst arch enemies. Yeah. As an example, right? If you go into a boardroom, women normally don't try to go and sit right next to the chairman. They might go and try to find a seat a little bit further out, but why are we so demure about having a seat at the table? This is something I constantly need to remind myself. And I was sharing a very funny example that maybe in a big meeting with Tony, if there's another guy who just decided to sit right next to Tony and started talking, nobody would even pay attention. But if a very good looking woman, wearing very nice clothes, decided to go and sit right next to Tony and started chatting, then everybody in the room will say, hey, look at her, who is she? These things continue to perpetuate and we need to go and break that. So I think it's definitely, we need to go and start having that mind shift change. That's the first part about the inside out. In terms of outside in Asia, we are very, very diverse. And so a lot of the programs and the cultural artifacts or basically physical totems that we establish. We have a program called Girls Can Do Anything, Girls Can Do Tech. We also have we celebrate International Women's Day. And we need to continue to go and cultivate that so that it doesn't just stay basically at a boardroom level, at a senior management level, but that has to cascade across all the different countries as well.
Yeah. And I think, what you mentioned is precisely why there's actually a quote saying, strong women lift each other up, right? Because there are some of these biases that's caused by women ourselves. Beverly, do you have any parting notes on that topic?
I think, the ladies have done such a great job of explaining that, and it's just taken the words out of my mouth. But, another thing is I think what we see in society or in workplaces is that oftentimes women are pitted against each other as well. And that's something that, is really important to remember. You're not in competition with each other. And it's also one of those things that you really do need to unlearn, because I think we've made it a habit as well of, comparing. We do a lot of comparisons, right? So remembering that lifting each other up, supporting each other, it lifts up the whole community is really important. And I think, earlier, when we were in the speaker room waiting to come on, we were chatting about communities and how great it is to meet other women in leadership positions or in any position in the industry, and really having an opportunity to share these experiences, share these learnings, and just talk.
Thank you so much. So I think just to quickly summarize it, we'd like to thank all three of you for sharing your views today. I think we talked about, first and foremost, being aware of unconscious bias, external and internal, recognize them, acknowledge them, and then speak out against them and knock them down. If you're a leader in this current climate, definitely try and be more human, show vulnerability, and really exercise empathy. And I think the third one really is we need to be more comfortable showcasing our awesomeness. A lot of us define success in other people's terms, and we're never really happy with the choices that we make. But I think that's first and foremost, we need to be comfortable and at peace with the choices that we make and showcasing ourselves and who we are. So thank you so much again to Surina, Karen, as well as Beverly.
So I want to just share one last thing to close on, Beverly, the importance of community. Like, we all need each other. We're here to build each other up. And then we're not competing, but we're completing each other.
Very good.
I love that. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.